My father always said the military ran in our blood. He just never believed it could run through mine. He said it at dinner tables, at backyard cookouts, at every 4th of July gathering where the men stood around the grill and talked about their service like it was the only language worth speaking. My father, my uncle, my grandfather's framed portrait on the living room wall, 3 stars on his collar, chin lifted, eyes that never looked soft in any photograph I'd ever seen. My father had 2 stars. He was working on the 3rd, and my brother had just gotten his first lieutenant bars, which my father announced at Thanksgiving like it was the headline of the century. I sat across the table and said nothing. I was 22 then. I had already been doing things I couldn't talk about for 8 months. Growing up, I wanted my father to look at me the way he looked at my brother. That was the whole truth of my childhood, stripped down to its ugliest form. My brother Marcus. No, wait, his name isn't in this story. I'll call him what he was to me, the favorite. The one my father drove to ROTC orientation himself. The one whose acceptance letter to the Naval Academy my father framed and hung next to my grandfather's portrait. The one who washed out after 14 months and came home to a welcome dinner instead of a conversation about accountability. I didn't get a framed letter. I didn't get a welcome dinner. What I got at 17 was my father standing in the doorway of my room while I was filling out an application. Not to a service academy, just to a state school in Virginia, and saying, "Good, you're not built for what this family does." He wasn't cruel about it. That was the thing that stayed with me longest. He said it the way you'd say the weather's going to turn or the car needs an oil change, like it was just a fact of nature. Like he had taken inventory of me at some point, run the numbers, and arrived at a conclusion. I was not built for it. I folded the application, I went to Virginia, and 2 months into my freshman year, I walked into a recruiting office on a Tuesday afternoon because something in me needed to prove that the inventory was wrong. I can't tell you everything. There are things I signed my name to that mean I will never be able to tell you everything. What I can say is that my path wasn't the straight line my father's was. I didn't go through the academy. I didn't go through OCS, the traditional route. I went through a door that most people don't know exists. And I went through it alone, and I went through it without telling my family a single word. My mother knew something. Mothers always do. She'd call on Sunday evenings and say, "You sound tired in a different way." And I'd say, "Work has been busy," and she'd go quiet for a second too long before changing the subject. She never pushed. I think she was afraid of what I'd tell her. My father thought I worked in logistics. That was the cover. And it wasn't entirely a lie. There is logistics involved in what I do. I coordinate, I plan, I account for variables. I just do it from angles he's never been trained to look from. For 3 years, I was stationed places I can't name, doing work I can't describe, with a team of people who became the closest thing I had to a second family. My call sign was Hollow Point. It was given to me after a 12-hour op in a situation I will only say involved 3 compromised assets, a monsoon, and a decision I made alone that my commanding officer later called textbook under conditions that had no textbook. I didn't feel textbook. I didn't feel textbook. I felt like I was going to be sick for about a week afterward, but I made the call, and it worked. And after that, they called me Hollow Point, and the name stuck. I was 28 when my father called me to tell me about the retirement ceremony. Not his retirement, he wasn't retiring. It was a ceremony honoring my grandfather, a posthumous recognition from the Department of the Navy for service records that had only recently been declassified. There was going to be a formal dinner at Naval Station Norfolk. Black tie, 200 officers, senior enlisted, DoD officials. My father's voice on the phone had that particular texture it got when he was proud of something and wanted you to know it without appearing to want you to know it. "It would look right if you were there," he said. Not "I want you there." Not "it would mean something to me." It would look right. I told him I'd try to arrange it. I arranged it. I took leave. I drove up from where I was staying in a city I won't name, and I bought a dress that wasn't my usual clothing, and I told myself it was just a dinner. A few hours. I could survive a few hours. My mother hugged me at the door of the hotel ballroom like she hadn't seen me in years. Which was almost true. She looked older in a way I felt guilty about. She touched my face and said, "You look strong." And I didn't know if she meant it as a compliment or as an observation she'd been sitting with for a while. My father was across the room when I arrived in full-dress uniform, talking to a cluster of men who all had the same posture, shoulders back, not from training anymore, but from muscle memory, so deep it had become bone. He saw me, he nodded. That was the greeting. My brother was there too, in civilian clothes, which already told you something. He'd been out of the service for 2 years. He was in sales now. Medical devices, I think. Or maybe commercial real estate. I could never keep it straight because he changed industries every 14 months or so. The same timeline, I noticed. As his Naval Academy tenure, he clapped me on the shoulder and said, "Hey, stranger." And I said, "Hey." And that was the full depth of our relationship summarized in 4 syllables. The dinner was the kind of event where the food was good, but you couldn't enjoy it because everyone was performing a version of themselves. I sat at a table with my mother and 2 women I didn't know, wives of officers, my father's age, who asked me what I did and nodded politely when I said logistics and then turned back to each other. I was fine with that. Fine was my baseline at family events. The ceremony started after the second course. My grandfather's medals were brought out. There was a speech. There were photographs. My father stood at the front of the room and received a shadow box on behalf of our family. And he looked, for just a moment, like a man who actually felt something rather than performed it. I watched him and thought, there's a person in there somewhere. I'd been thinking that my whole life, looking for signs of the person. Then the dinner resumed, and he came back to our table and the person disappeared back behind the uniform. It happened between the salad and the dessert. An officer I didn't recognize came into the room from a side entrance. Not in dinner dress, in working khakis, which meant something had come in. He went directly to a man at the table next to ours, a Navy captain I had clocked when I walked in because old habits make you clock everyone. They spoke quietly. The captain's face changed. He stood. He said something to the room. I didn't catch all of it. Something about an operational request, a coordination need, assets being asked for. He said a designation I recognized. I won't write it here, but I recognized it and my spine went still the way it does when your body understands something before your brain finishes processing it. My father was 2 seats to my left. I felt him more than saw him, the way his attention shifted, the way he straightened. The captain said they needed to confirm the availability of a specific asset currently in the area. He gave a secondary designation. That one was mine. I set down my salad fork. My mother looked at me. I don't know what she saw in my face, but whatever it was made her go very still. My father said, loudly enough for our table to hear. Loudly enough, if I'm honest, for the 3 tables nearest us to hear. She works in paper pushing. Logistics admin. He said it with a small laugh, the kind that wasn't cruel on its surface, but had cruelty in its architecture. He was talking to the man next to him, not to me, which was somehow worse. She's not who you're looking for. I looked at the captain. The captain looked at me. He said, "Ma'am, I need to confirm, are you?" And he said the designation. I said yes. The room near us went quiet in a radius. My father turned, fully turned. For the first time that evening, he was actually looking at me. Not nodding, not glancing, looking. And I watched his expression go through 4 or 5 phases in about 2 seconds. Confusion, recalculation, something that might have been the beginning of understanding. Then, and I will remember this for the rest of my life, a kind of shrinking. Not physical, something behind his eyes. He had just told a roomful of senior officers that I was nobody. He had been wrong in a way that couldn't be taken back quietly. I excused myself from the table. The captain walked with me to the side entrance and 2 other people I recognized came in from the corridor outside. We spoke for 11 minutes. I told them what I could confirm. I told them what I needed to review before I could confirm the rest. The captain said, "We've heard about Hollow Point. Your record speaks for itself." I said, "Thank you, sir." He said, "Can we count on your availability?" I said, "Give me 24 hours to get back to you through the proper channel." He nodded. That was it. I went back inside. My father was standing near the bar when I came back in. He wasn't with anyone. That told me the people he'd been with had moved away, probably after someone leaned over and told him what exactly his daughter's designation meant. He had a drink in his hand that he wasn't drinking. I walked over because I was not going to let him come to me. That was not something I was willing to give him. He said, "I didn't know." I said, "I know you didn't." He said, "Why didn't you?" And then he stopped himself, because I think he could hear how it was going to sound before he finished it. I helped him finish it anyway. Why didn't I tell you? I said. Because you told me at 17 that I wasn't built for this. Because every time I was home, you asked my brother about his career and asked me if I was seeing anyone. Because the last time I tried to tell you something I'd accomplished, you changed the subject to his commission. I wasn't raising my voice. I want to be clear about that. I was very calm. Calm is something I've been trained to be, and sometimes the training is the only thing standing between you and the version of yourself that would make a scene. I stopped needing you to know, I said. I didn't stop needing you to know because I stopped loving you. I stopped needing you to know because I had to survive without it. He looked at his drink. He said, I was trying to protect you. I had expected that one. It's always protection. It's always love that just happens to look like dismissal from every angle. From what? I asked. Not challenging. Genuinely asking. He didn't have an answer. I watched him look for one and not find it. I have to get back to my mother, I said. Thank you for inviting me tonight. The ceremony for Grandpa was beautiful. He deserved it. I touched his arm once, just once, briefly, and I walked back to my table. My mother was waiting with a look that had too many things in it to name. I sat down. She put her hand over mine. She didn't ask anything. She just left her hand there. The dessert came. Chocolate lava cake. I ate the whole thing. Afterward, in the parking lot, my brother caught up with me. He said I didn't know either. I said, I know. He said, does it feel good that he saw it? Does it feel good that he saw it? I thought about that for a second. The honest answer was complicated. It didn't feel the way I'd imagined it would feel when I was 22 and angry and trying to prove something. It didn't feel like winning. It felt like a door I'd been standing in front of for 20 years had finally swung open, and on the other side was just a room. An ordinary room. Not a treasure, not a weapon, just a room that had been closed. It feels like the end of something, I said. I'm not sure yet if that's good or not. My brother nodded. He's not a bad person. He just spent too many years being shaped by the same hands that tried to flatten me. That's not his fault. It's not entirely his fault, he said. You want to get coffee? There's a diner about a mile from here. I looked at him for a second. He looked back. For the first time in maybe a decade, I saw my brother instead of the favorite, instead of the symbol of everything that had been handed to him. Just a man in a parking lot, holding his keys, trying to figure out if there was a version of our family worth salvaging. Yeah, I said, let's get coffee. We sat at the diner for 2 hours. We talked about things that had nothing to do with the military or our father. His kid, who had just turned 3 and apparently had a personality the size of the building, his new job, which he admitted he wasn't sure about, the way our mother had started taking a pottery class on Thursday evenings and had produced, in his words, a bowl that looks like it's in pain, but she loves it. I laughed. Real laughing, the kind that comes from somewhere lower than politeness. He said, I'm sorry. For not, I don't know, seeing it when we were kids. I said, you were a kid too. Still, I agreed, but we're not kids now. He drove back to his hotel. I drove back to mine. I sat on the edge of the bed for a while and just let myself be quiet. 3 days later, I was back at work. The kind of work I can't describe. There was a briefing. There were people in the room who knew my record and spoke to me accordingly. There was a map on the screen and a timeline and a set of variables that needed to be accounted for. I accounted for them. I always do. At some point during the briefing, someone asked me where I'd been the previous week, the way people do when they're not asking officially, just making conversation. I said I'd been at a family event, a ceremony for my grandfather. They asked if it was a good trip. I thought about the ballroom and my father's face going through those phases, and my mother's hand over mine, and the parking lot, and the diner, and the bowl that looked like it was in pain. It was what it needed to be, I said. That felt true enough. There's a photograph my mother sent me about a week after the dinner. She'd taken it at the ceremony before any of the rest of it happened, before the captain, before the side entrance, before any of it. It's a picture of me at the dinner table in my dress, looking at something off camera. I'm not smiling, I'm just looking. And there's something in my posture. My mother didn't say this. She didn't caption the photo with anything except a small heart emoji. But I could see it. There's something in my posture that looks, if you know what to look for, exactly like my grandfather in his portrait. Chin up, eyes that don't need anything from the room. I put it in a frame. Not on a wall yet. Just on my desk, face up, where I can see it when I sit down. Some things take time to figure out where they belong. My father called me 2 weeks after the dinner. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message that was 4 sentences long and took me 3 days to listen to. He said he was proud of me. He said he should have said it a long time ago. He said he understood if I needed time. He said he understood if I needed time. He said he loved me. I listened to it twice. I didn't call back right away. That probably sounds cold. But I'd spent a lot of years trying to earn 4 sentences from him. And now that I had them, I needed to figure out what they were worth to me. Not to him. Not to the version of myself who was 17 and waiting in a doorway. But to me now, the person who'd been in rooms he'll never have clearance to know about. The person who'd made calls that couldn't be unmade. The person who didn't need the 4 sentences to be okay, but still, somewhere, had wanted them. I called him back on a Sunday. We talked for 22 minutes. We talked around most of the real things, the way families do, but we talked. He asked about my work. I said it was going well. He said, "I believe you now," which was, for my father, as close to an apology as I was likely to get. I said, "I know." And I did. I still don't know how this ends. If there's a version of my father in me that looks like the thing I wanted when I was a child, or if what we have now is the real thing and the child version was always just a fantasy. I'm 31 years old. I've made peace with not knowing. I've made peace with a lot of things that used to keep me awake. What I know is this. I am not what he decided I was at 17. I never was. And the proof of that isn't in any ceremony or designation or the look on his face in that ballroom. The proof is that I kept going after he told me to stop. That's the part that was always mine. Not his to give. Not his to take. I did that. And I'd do it again. I've thought a lot about what my father said in that ballroom. Not the loud part. Not the she pushes paper part that landed wrong in front of 200 people. The part I keep coming back to was earlier, quieter. The nod when I walked in. Just a nod. After everything, there's a version of me that spent years being furious about that nod. And I was. I'd be lying if I said the anger wasn't real, wasn't useful in its own way. Anger got me out of bed on mornings when nothing else would. Anger drove me through training cycles that broke people twice my size. Anger sat in a passenger seat for a long time. But here's what I've figured out on the other side of that dinner. On the other side of that parking lot conversation with my brother. On the other side of a Sunday phone call that lasted 22 minutes. The people who dismiss you early are usually responding to something in themselves, not something in you. My father looked at me at 17 and saw a ceiling. That ceiling wasn't mine, it was his. He'd built it out of everything he believed about what strength looked like, what service looked like, what his family was supposed to produce, and in what order. I didn't fit the blueprint, so he decided the blueprint was right and I was wrong. That's a choice. And choices have weight. What I did with his choice was also a choice. I could have accepted it. A lot of people do, and I don't judge them for it, because the pressure of a parent's verdict is one of the heaviest things a person can carry. Or I could walk into a recruiting office on a Tuesday and find out for myself what I was made of. I did the second thing, not because I was brave, because I was tired of living inside someone else's assessment of me. The intelligence part, the actual sitting down and thinking part, was figuring out that proving him wrong was never going to be enough. If I'd built my whole career on his disapproval, I'd have handed him the wheel anyway. The work had to become mine. The purpose had to become mine. At some point, maybe 3 years in, it did. That's when things shifted. That's when things shifted. That's when I stopped performing and started just doing. And the integrity part, the part I'm still working on, is deciding what to do now that I have the 4 sentences. Now that he said he was proud. Now that the door that was closed for 20 years is open. The easy thing would be to either slam it shut as payback or rush through it like nothing happened. Neither of those is honest. What's honest is standing in the doorway and deciding slowly with clear eyes what kind of relationship is actually possible between 2 people who spent decades misreading each other. That's not a dramatic answer. It doesn't have a clean ending. But it's real. My grandfather never knew me. He died before I was old enough for him to take an inventory of me and decide what I was worth. Maybe that's why, when I look at his portrait, chin up, eyes that need nothing from the room, I feel something like kinship. We never got the chance to disappoint each other. What's left is just a posture. Just the example. I'll take it.